Plaintiff's next witness, please.
Thank you. Call Michael Murphy to the stand.
Sir, would you please step into the witness box here and raise your right hand so that you can be sworn?
Yes, I do. Sorry, I'm a big guy. Yeah, my name's Michael Murphy. Last name spelled M-U-R-P-H-Y. First name M-I-C-H-A-E-L.
Mr. Murphy, good morning.
Good morning.
Did you take the oath yet? I didn't notice. I don't know.
Yes.
That you took the oath. Okay. So you've been sworn in. Would you tell the court and jury your name, please?
Michael Murphy.
And Mr. Murphy, you and I have never spoken together, have we?
No.
Have you ever met me before?
No.
Have you gone over your testimony with anyone before you came here?
No.
Speak with Mr. Chalmers.
Yes.
So you have gone over your testimony.
Well, we didn't discuss what I was going to say today.
What did you discuss?
He basically just asked me kind of what happened that day and asked me what I saw and what I did that day. And I just told him exactly what happened. My involvement was actually really short, so it only took a few minutes.
You're a jailer at the Sedgwick County Jail.
Yes.
How long have you been a jailer?
Since 2005.
So in March, say March 10th of 2010, or excuse me, 2008, how long had you been there approximately?
3 years.
Okay. How would it come about that you, or excuse me, strike that. Do you work in a particular area or do you work in all the areas?
No, we work in all the areas.
Pod number 1 is, I understand, a maximum security
Yes, it is.
area. Why do you know whether, is there any reason to put sick people in a maximum security?
Classification is something the corporals do, and it's based on either past history with us or a history with Department of Corrections.
Well, I'm sorry.
That's how classification comes about.
Well, I'm sorry, are you finished?
Yes.
Well, you don't send max security prisoners out to other jails, do you?
Yes,
like
we do.
Staton. And so regardless of they're sick or not, they go to max security because of a classification?
Yeah, classification determines where they're housed.
And in max security, I guess, what does that mean? That, or strike that. My understanding is at least every hour, one of the jailers has to go around to each of the cells and make sure that the person is there.
There is actually no policy written about rounds. It is common practice that deputies do make rounds, but there actually is no policy written about it.
My understanding is, I didn't ask you about that, that the deputies make rounds every hour and do a head count.
Head count's actually done at the beginning of the shift and at the end of shift.
Now answer my question. They make rounds every hour, don't they?
I can't say that every deputy makes rounds every hour because there actually is no policy that states that rounds need to be made every hour.
So, since there's no policy, I guess deputies could come there and camp out.
No.
Not do anything, right?
Counsel, there's no place for sarcasm in this.
Well, I mean, I'm asking you, to your knowledge, that they do it once an hour. You've seen them do it in Pod 1 once an hour, haven't you?
Once again, I'm telling you, I can't speculate on how often deputies make rounds in an aggravated pod.
Try it one more time. You've seen them do rounds
Seen-
every hour in Pod 1, haven't you?
I've seen deputies make rounds in Pod 1.
Every hour.
No.
And do you work in Pod 1?
I have worked in Pod 1.
How would you ever have been, where were you working on the morning of March the 10th?
I was a Rover 2 South.
What does that mean? You could go anywhere in
I
the
was
jail?
the Rover for relief for breaks and supplies and anything for the pods 5 through 8.
Well, the defendant, Jameson, says he was a rover, too.
Yes, he was Rover 1 South.
Okay. So if you were a rover in 5 through 8, he was a rover in what, 1 through?
1 through 4.
So why, if you're a rover in 5 through 8, why would you ever be called into Pod 1?
I would be his backup. The only reason I was in the pod that morning because we had a linen exchange, which requires 2 deputies to do. That would actually be my responsibility to assist 1 South.
So you were actually in the pod that
I was
morning.
in the gymnasium, yes.
And is the linen exchange before or after 9 o'clock?
It really depends on when we get to that pod. I cannot remember the order. On Monday mornings, at that time, we did linen exchange 1 through 4, all 4 pods. So I don't know what order we went in.
Are jailers supposed to have observational skills?
Yes.
Are you expected, even perhaps more than most people, to be able to observe the people who are there, you call them the inmates, in terms of their welfare?
I believe so.
Isn't your job to protect the safety and welfare of the inmates?
Yes, it is.
I'm sorry, I have an opportunity to object. I don't understand how this sort of testimony has a place in this case, and I object to this kind of duty of care testimony.
I agree. I will instruct the jury on what the law is and what their obligations are with regard to taking care of inmates.
I'm not instructing, Your Honor. May I respond? My
Yes, but
question
you're
isn't about the
you're
law.
insinuating that the standard is different than what it is.
I am not insinuating that. That's why I'm asking to respond. I'm not insinuating that at all.
You can approach
it has
the bench if you want to respond and argue about what the law is.
I'm not arguing about what the law is. I'm asking to ask questions about the ability of these people to observe what's in front of them in terms of the job they have. For instance, people who are trained in the law understand some of the law. People who are trained in, taking care of prisoners.
Bench.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear. just to be clear, your job or the job of the deputies in the jail is to, one of the jobs, of course, is to be alert and care for the safety and health of the people there, right?
Your Honor, I object. We're right where we're not supposed to be.
I thought you were going to ask him about what training he had received.
Okay, have you received training to take care of people?
I don't understand that question.
Okay. Do you have any difficulty observing or seeing personally?
No.
Okay. You were in pod 1 doing a linen exchange. Mm-hmm. Mr. Bruner was in pod 1. Mm-hmm. He apparently never brought his linens out on that day.
Yeah.
Did you know at the time that he hadn't brought his linens out?
No, I did not. We don't actually take a full account of everybody at the time. The deputies that are in the gymnasium doing lane exchange.
Mm-hmm. And apparently, because I'm leading up to your involvement in the case, which directly relates to this, at the time of linen exchange, Mr. Bruner was walking aimlessly without his linen and couldn't even navigate back into his cell.
Yeah, that was a few minutes later. I don't know when he came out because I don't have a direct view of, he lived in section C and I didn't have direct view of that. It wasn't until after we were called into that section that I saw Mr. Bruner.
Oh, that's right. Let's establish a time frame. Was it at or before 9 a.m. that you had some contact with Mr. Bruner, or shortly thereafter?
To be honest, I can't remember the exact time I made contact with Mr. Bruner. It was during the linen exchange process.
Okay. Got it. And when is the linen exchange process generally?
It's for depends on the pod, on what day of the week they have it, but we usually start it right after the beginning of shift. So it usually starts by around 8 o'clock in the morning. Okay. And I can't remember at what time we got to pod 1, because we have 4 pods to do that day.
Okay. Now apparently that morning, at or about 8 a.m. in the morning, the defendant, Staton, wanted you to help her with Mr. Bruner.
Yes.
So apparently she had some knowledge of Mr. Bruner.
I don't know what knowledge she had of him, except for he was standing in the middle of the day room.
Well, the knowledge, at least that you're aware she had, is that something that she needed help with him.
Yeah, because he was standing in the middle of the day room and he wouldn't respond to her.
Mm-hmm. A human being who, now I'm asking in your experience, who is incoherent and doesn't respond to you, does that cause you, as a jailer, some concern?
Not necessarily. A lot of inmates refuse to respond to us.
So is your answer no, or yes, or maybe? Or because my question was, a person who's standing, or you have knowledge of, who's walking around aimlessly and incoherent, whether that causes some concern. And your answer was not necessarily. So is the answer no, it doesn't cause you any concern when you see a person in the jail walking around aimlessly and incoherent? Is your answer, I have no concern about that, or I do have concern?
I did not say that. I said not necessarily. It really depends. Without further investigation with this individual, I couldn't tell you if it should cause me concern. There's a lot of inmates in there who refuse to respond to us.
I understand that, but he wasn't one of, what do you mean, refused to respond because they chose not to?
When I made contact with Mr. Bruner,
But please answer my question. Does that mean that you believe that there's people in the jail who refuse to respond to you because they just don't want to.
Yes.
Okay. Now, I'm talking about, do you leave room for the possibility that there are people who are, because of medical illness, might be so sick that they're unable to respond to you?
Oh, yes, that
All
is a
right.
possibility.
So when you come across a person who is unable to respond to you and is acting incoherently, okay? Do you assume that they're faking, or do you assume that they're in dire need of help, or do you ask questions? What do you do?
Well, that really depends. I mean, depends on the situation. I can't give you a blanket statement for every possible situation there
That's
is.
fair enough. In this particular case, we'll deal just with the facts of this case, okay?
Okay.
And so we're not going to deal with not necessarily, because you seem to be talking about different cases. I want to talk about this case, okay?
Yeah, but you're asking me to speculate on what Deputy Staton thought. When I made contact,
No, I didn't. I'm asking you whether you're aware that she knew that one of the people that she's in charge of their care and their welfare, was walking around aimlessly and incoherently, whether or not she knew that, to your knowledge.
I know that she knew there was someone standing in the day room who refused to respond to her. I don't know anything beyond that.
Now, you say you know he refused to respond to her. Do you mean he wasn't responding, or he was choosing not to respond to her?
I don't. He responded to our directives right off the bat.
Did he talk to you?
No, he did not talk.
Did you talk to him?
Yes.
Did you ask him if he was okay?
I can't remember the exact words.
Well, help me understand that. You find a man who's walking around aimlessly and incoherently, and apparently, correct me if I'm wrong, unable to get into his own cell, to figure out how to open the door.
I don't know if he was unable to get into his own cell or refusing to go into his own cell.
Well, did you ask him?
Yes, I asked him to enter his cell.
No, I asked him, Mr. Bruner, are you okay? Did you ask him that?
I believe so.
And what did he say to you?
Nothing.
Okay. Did you further ask him questions and say, Mr. Bruner, is there something wrong I can help you with?
No, sir.
And let me ask you a final, not the final question, but did he look sick to you?
No, he did not.
I see he looked well.
No, he did not look well. I didn't say that. But he didn't look sick. He looked confused. I actually believed he had a mental health condition at the time.
Did you know he hadn't eaten for days?
No. I had 30 seconds of contact with him.
Did you know that he would be brain dead later that day from a disease process that everybody agrees and we've stipulated to has been going on for quite some time?
No, I did not know that.
Did you know that the defendants in this case have stipulated that before you saw him, he suffered from a disease that was a serious medical illness?
No.
Are you claiming that somehow a man who's admitted and the defendants have admitted this, that as of 7 a.m. on March the 10th, Terry Bruner had a serious medical need and was suffering from streptococcal pneumonia, sepsis, and meningitis, or other serious illnesses. They've stipulated to that. Are you claiming that you saw a man suffering from these illnesses who didn't look sick?
Your Honor, I have to object to the way the question is phrased. He's not here to make claims. He's here to testify and answer the questions, and I don't think it's a proper way to phrase the question.
May I respond? He just testified. He thinks he didn't look sick to him. I'm entitled to impeach him on that. He's obviously an adverse witness, and I'm impeaching him on a claim that a man who's, under the circumstances of the admissions in this case, I am hearing from a witness that a man suffering from these illnesses didn't look sick. That's why I'm impeaching him.
Well, are you trying to impeach him using the testimony of other witnesses?
No, the admission of the defendants, the stipulation that was entered into.
Stipulation doesn't say anything about how one appears. It talks about the conditions that he had. It goes to the whole issue. The whole issue of the case is how he appeared, not whether he had the condition.
I don't know that this witness has, I mean, obviously he can testify as to what he sees, but unless he's got some medical training which helps him evaluate the significance of the stipulations, I don't think this is a fair question to him.
Thank you, Your Honor. Continuing on then, Deputy Defendant Staton didn't tell you that he hadn't, to her knowledge, he hadn't eaten for days.
No.
Did she tell you that he was standing in front of his door and couldn't get in?
No.
Apparently, she believed she needed your help and the help of others to make him go into his cell?
When it comes to Mr. Bruner, yes, she needed us to keep sure he got back to his room.
Well, help me now, okay, because I'm just talking about Mr. Bruner.
Mm-hmm.
My understanding was that the people, was he locked down in his cell or was he allowed to walk around?
When linen exchange for that section happens, Deputy Staton would have made an announcement that linen exchange would have happened, and she would have popped all the doors in that sections. I am assuming that's when he came out of his room, and when the rest of the section was in the gymnasium with us, and after they finished, they go back to their section and then back into their rooms and resecure their doors. When that is when she called us, when he was still the only individual still in the day room, and he refused to respond to her.
Well, you keep saying he refused.
Yeah,
Did you know he was unable?
Well, I don't know that he was unable, because upon my entry into the section, and she just said he needs to go back into his cell, I asked what cell he belonged to, and she popped that cell's door. I opened the door, and we just said, "Come on, Mr. Bruner, you need to head back into your section, or into your room." And he walked right into his room.
Why didn't you get him his sheets?
At that time, I still did not know that he did not come into the gymnasium.
Well, did you ask him? Did you ask?
I did ask him.
Well, wait, excuse me, let me ask the question. Staton is right behind you, looking out of a window in a pod, right? Did you turn around to her and say, "Does he need sheets?"
No, I didn't ask him.
She's probably closer to you than she is right now, right?
Approximately the same distance.
Okay. And you're standing here, and she apparently has called you and the defendant to take a confused man. That's your word, confused. Okay, man staring at the ground back into his cell, right?
Yes.
Did you turn around and say to her, "What's going on here"?
Not at the time when I'm dealing with
Yes
Mr.
or
Bruner.
no? It's
No.
yes. No, okay.
No.
Why?
I don't understand the question.
Yep, a man is standing there. To you, I'm using your words. I've read your report. He looks confused. He can't follow direction. A person is looking in a booth right there, telling you to get him back in his cell. Did you turn around to her and say, "What's going on here"?
Well, I did. We did talk to her after Mr. Bruner was put back in his cell, but not while we were doing it.
Oh, so you got him back into the cell, and then you went and said, "What's going on here"?
Yes.
So did she tell you then that he hadn't eaten for days and that she knew it?
No.
Did she tell you, did you ask her how long he's been acting like this?
No.
Well, What did you talk about Mr. Bruner?
Well, we informed her that he did appear to be confused, and I actually thought he was possibly under the influence of some type of drug.
So he needed help. You told her, this man, I'm not a doctor, but something's wrong here. He needs help. You told her that, right?
I informed her of the situation.
So she knew, from your mouth at least, according to you,
Yes.
this man needs help.
Well, I did not say that. I just informed her of just what I told you.
You didn't say he needed help. It was obvious he needed help. You just told her, something's wrong with this man. Right?
Yes.
Okay. So to your knowledge, she knew it, right?
Well, she knew what I told her. Right. I don't know anything about anything else you said. I don't know anything about not eating for days or he's been acting strangely for days. I have no knowledge of that.
And you never asked.
No, I did not.
And of course, Mr. Jameson, the other defendant, was standing right next to you.
Yes, he was.
And so he knew exactly what you were saying too. He knew everything that you know and that you told Staton, who's standing behind you looking. He knew,
Yes.
right? Did you talk to Mr. Jameson and say, what's going on here?
I went back to what we were doing. We finished lending exchange.
So is the answer yes
No,
or no?
I did not.
So you two big deputies stand next to a man who's walking confused, who can't get into his own room, and you stand there and you don't even say a word to one another about the man? Is that your testimony?
Yes, that's my testimony.
And just to be clear, this is in Evidence Exhibit 2. Everyone has your statement. You observed at that time, and so Mr. Jameson was standing right there too. Mr. Bruner looked confused and was walking around the section staring at the ground.
Yes.
Why did you need two people?
Actually,
Since he was,
actually, she didn't call for two people. Me and Jameson were just talking while we were in the gymnasium. We were working together, and she called for Jameson to come up and assist her with this individual. I just decided to walk in there with him. That's how I ended up in the section.
just normal curiosity. Well, hey, what's going on here?
Yeah, because we didn't think a big deal of it.
Sure. So then when you see that a man's standing there, looking confused, walking around aimlessly on the floor, but then you never talk about it.
It's not uncommon for us to see that at the jail.
And so obviously it wouldn't be uncommon for people to die like Mr. Bruner died. That's very common, right?
No, it's not.
Okay. Now, this is obvious. Are you saying that this is not an unusual event?
There's many individuals that come in and out of the facility that have mental health conditions who act in very, very bizarre behavior.
And does that mean
We did, like I said, we informed Staton because that's what we believed what was going on, but that's an everyday thing with us. We see this quite often.
Was it your belief that people who suffer from mental illness don't get the same care as people who suffer from medical illness?
I believe everybody gets the care that's needed.
Well, regardless if you thought it was mental or physical, it was obviously something bad. What if he had had a stroke?
Well, I'm not going to speculate on what he would have had.
Well, he wasn't responding. He was looking confused. Let me say it a different way. If he was screaming in pain and holding his chest, would you get him medical care?
Oh, yes.
Okay, well, if a man, do you know the symptoms of a stroke?
No.
And so, to your knowledge, he walked, or was he shuffling, or was walking like a healthy
He
guy?
walked slowly into his room.
Slowly,
Yes.
and he was staring at the ground.
Yes.
How does he look confused? Explain to the court and jury how somebody looks confused.
He looked, there's quite a few of the mental health inmates that require,
I didn't ask you that. I asked you how he looked confused.
I think he's interrupting the witness. The witness is trying to answer the question.
Non-responsive. I'm asking how Mr. Bruner looked confused, and he's telling me about other people.
But you didn't give him a chance to explain, so if he doesn't answer your question, we'll redirect him. Go ahead.
Thank
so many of them take large amounts of medications there. And many inmates take large amounts of lithium. And I've seen that on many incidents. And that's what Mr. Bruner looked like.
Did you ask if he takes lithium?
No, I did not.
Now, will
We
you
never
show-
ask, we what inmates what medications they take.
I didn't. Did you ask Deputy, the defendant Staton, who's right behind you, whether he's on lithium?
She wouldn't know because
She'd know
we're
if
not,
he-
we're not given that knowledge.
Oh, excuse me. Every day, people come into the pod twice a day to pass out medication.
I realize that, but we're not given exactly the list of medications people are given.
I know, but you know that whether somebody takes it or doesn't. You don't know the medication, but you know if somebody is supposed to receive medication, don't you?
I didn't even know Mr. Bruner.
You keep changing the question.
No,
The
I'm
question-
not, because I didn't know Mr. Bruner. I didn't know what medications or if any medications he was on, but he appeared that he was, just like I've seen before, that he has taken massive amounts of lithium.
So, my question to you is, is it your claim that somebody who is suffering from what you thought was mental illness doesn't get medical care?
I'm not saying that.
You just didn't do it.
I did not call.
Show us how he looked confused. I'm using your words. Inmate Bruner looked confused. Show the court and jury how he looked.
Well, I can't act it out. And I refuse to act it out. But he was confused. He was staring at the ground.
Just describe how he looked. I'm not asking you to act it out. Show us, or excuse me, explain to us what you meant by looked confused.
He was just standing by himself in the center of the day room. And he was just staring straight at the ground. When we approached him, when we were told that he was standing there, when I asked what room he was in, I believe it was 124. And Deputy Staton popped his door, and I went over and just opened the door. And I called over to Mr. Bruner. Come on, sir. We need to head back in his room. And he just didn't respond right away. But after a second, he slowly walked to his room. He looked like anybody who was extremely intoxicated.
Well, since he obviously wasn't drinking in his cell, didn't that concern you?
Because
Or strike that. So are you suggesting that because you're not a doctor and he looked like a man who was intoxicated even though he'd been there for 5 days?
I didn't know he was there for 5 days. I didn't know Mr. Bruner.
So are you telling the court and jury that you just assumed he was a drunk and therefore he didn't need any special attention?
I assumed he was on mental health medication, like I've already stated.
I have no further.
Cross-examination.
I'm going to start in the middle and then go back to the beginning.
Mr. Bruner, when you saw him for what, about 30 seconds?
Yeah, maybe 30 seconds.
You and Mr. Jameson both for about 30 seconds. That
Yes, it was about 30 seconds.
when you saw him, you I think testified he obviously needed help. What sort of help were you talking about?
What was that?
Well, I wrote down your testimony, I think, is that you thought when you saw him that Mr. Bruner obviously needed help.
Oh, yeah, I think he needed to see mental health.
Did you need to see mental health right then?
Oh, no.
Was this an emergency?
I didn't believe so at the time.
Did you see...
Excuse me. Your Honor, may I place an objection? The objection was that I couldn't ask him any questions about medical emergency because he wouldn't understand anything. And then the defendants asked him whether it was an emergency, and now he would have to have medical knowledge.
I don't remember the exact question, but it wasn't as Mr. Feiger described it. What I'm trying to do is get a handle on, now that Mr. Feiger's asked what was obvious, what this opinion's judgment was, Your Honor.
You were trying to impeach him using the stipulations that contain specific medical terms. I don't think that's what Mr. Chalmers is trying to do.
Okay.
When you saw Mr. Bruner, did you understand or believe it was, and you talked about he needed help, that it was an emergency to get him to see help?
No.
It would have been appropriate to get him lined up with mental health down the line.
Yes. That's why we informed Deputy Staton.
Now, let me back up for a second. The diagram of the pod is on the screen in front of you.
Yes.
I think I've got it right side up. Yeah.
Yep,
That's
that's
first
right.
level? Okay. And help me, where is it where you saw him?
In the center of Section C.
Is this section
That's
C
the
over
big
here?
section is Section C, yes.
Okay, so-
It'd be in the center, right about there.
Okay. And this is where the
That's
pod
where
deputy?
Yeah, that's where Deputy Staton was.
Okay, and the gym, where is it?
It would be back down the hallway. You see
We've got a couple
the
hallways
bottom
here.
there.
Here?
No, the bottom.
Bottom?
Yeah, and to the right.
This
It would
way?
be back down there.
Okay, so when you folks are in the hallway with the linen exchange, you have no point of observation to see into?
Yeah, we can't see in there.
Now, you were a Rover 1, and you were
Oh,
responsible...
Rover 2 South.
Rover 2 South, I'm sorry. And so you were responsible for a series of pods. Mr. Jameson was responsible for a series of pods. There were also rovers for the North Jail?
Yes.
And how many rovers would have been for
3 on the north, and then there's additional rovers for both cores, Core 1 and Core 2. And if we have the personnel, we have movements, which are even more additional rovers, which we use to move or assist inmates moving from one location to another.
Is there a rover who has responsibility for the clinic area?
If we have a Core 2, that is a rover, but we have 2 deputies in the clinic area.
So, talking about your day, that is March 10, Rover South 2, what sort of duties and activities do you have during the course of a Monday?
Well, if it was on a Monday, so my first duty for the day would be to assist the 1 South deputy with linen exchange. And that could take anywhere from an hour to an hour and a half. After that, my next duty would be to go around and keep sure all my pods are sufficiently stocked with supplies, toilet paper for the inmates, inmate request forms, medication, paper towels, trash bags, whatever, and see if the deputies, when they'd like to break, or if they needed any assistance at that time.
Is there downtime for rovers?
Oh yeah, there's time for us to take a break. You know, we squeeze our breaks in between assisting other people.
When you're not taking formally a break, is a rover a pretty active job? You're up.
Yes, because there's so much movement going on during first shift that the movement deputies usually cannot keep up with the load. So it'd be our responsibility to assist them. People going to court, people going to the clinic, people going family visit or whatnot.
In Exhibit 401, show that to you. There's it's not the best copy, but an inmate summary that's on the computer of Terry Bruner. You're familiar with that, aren't you?
Yeah.
These inmate summaries are available for deputies that are in the pods located at a station, whether it's an indirect pod or whether it's a direct pod where you're out among inmates on the computer, right?
Anybody who has access to a computer that has this program, which is called iLeads, has access to look up any inmate they want to.
But if you're a rover, you don't have a computer with you, so you don't have this information.
The only time I'd have access to iLeads is when I'm relieving that deputy for their break.
So if hypothetically you were to have given a break to a deputy in pod 4?
Yeah, 4.
4, then at that point you would have access to the computer.
Yes.
Now, there are some buttons here on the left, one of which is a warning. Is that a button that you push if you want to input information in concerning it?
Yeah, warning screens could be used for many different reasons. Actual warnings for disciplinary problems, observations we make, or anybody who actually gets clocked out of the pod to go somewhere else. If someone went to family visit for that thing, it would actually show up in the inmate warning screen. It automatically logs there.
Now, nothing on this form talks about an inmate's medical condition.
Oh no, we're not given that information.
It does talk about blood and bodily fluid precautions.
Yeah,
doesn't it?
that's just because it's a precautionary thing when you're dealing with that inmate.
And I think you indicated you don't ask inmates what medicines they're on. Is that right?
Oh no.
Why is that?
It's really none of my business.
If you have an inmate in there who is being treated for AIDS or treated for some condition,
We are not given that information. That falls under HIPAA laws, so the clinic does not give us any information on people's illnesses. The only thing they do have is the blood and body fluid precautions, because we do have a lot of inmates with either hepatitis or HIV or anything, but we're not actually told what they have. It's just that we should be very careful when dealing with them, and that's all that's on there for.
so unless you have firsthand contact with an inmate and some experience of that inmate, when you go into a pod and there's an inmate there, you don't have any information about their medical past?
Oh no. In fact, for the most part, and I can't speak about all deputies, I don't even look up people's inmate summaries unless that particular inmate comes up and requests information off of it.
Okay. And if you did, this would be the information you
That'd be the information that we have.
Let me talk to you about a daily activity log for a moment, and this is part of .407, Exhibit 407. It's in evidence.
Is it in here?
When I think you indicated that, and you have, we talked about that, you've acted as a rover. I think you were asked, you've acted as a rover, you've acted as a pod deputy, you've worked in booking.
I've worked every position that falls within my title.
And when you are at the computer in the pod, do you maintain a activity log?
Yes, an activity log. It's actually required for all pod deputies.
And this is, as you see, an activity log for Pod 1 that shows over this time frame, March 6, 2008 to March 10, 2008. But the log itself, as you're on the screen, may look a little different than this.
Yeah, because it's just like a blank form. and we format it the way it feels most comfortable to us.
Now, when you first come to a pod as a pod deputy, is there a meeting with the previous shift?
Yeah, the deputy in there, we call it selling the post, and they would have a lineup of all the inmates in the pod and what cells they're in, and then we'd go make head count and confirm that everybody is in the pod that's supposed to be there, and then he would tell us any pertinent information at that time.
So about the only information you might have is that there was something unusual from the previous shift about an inmate. You might get some sort of information about that.
If the deputy decided to pass that on.
All right. And you talked about a head count. What is a head count?
It's just walking through the sections and looking into every room and verifying that there is an inmate who's supposed to be assigned to that room, who's actually in that room. If they are not there, then we'd find out where they are. Because sometimes they're clocked out because, they're at court or for various other reasons.
What responsibilities do rovers have during the course of the day to move inmates around?
We do have some inmates that require assistance getting around, either because of they're either flagged from another individual within the facility, or they're a high-risk individual who needs special handling moving around. So it would be our responsibility if, for example, I keep using family visit, but it's very common on first shift. We have someone who is flagged from someone else, and they just need to escort down to that location. So a rover would be responsible to going to the pod, for example, pod 1, and then escorting that inmate to family visit, where there is another deputy who would take possession of him, and then that rover would be freed up. Their only time they'd be tied up is during that, transportation phase.
Inmates wear different colored
Yes.
jumpsuits, and that's to indicate that some inmates may be a higher risk, or maybe where I think you put it on what was it?
Yeah, we have 4 colors. 10 would be our trustees. Orange is for a normal inmate. That has nothing to do with the classification of the inmate. Red is usually your escape risk or very violent inmates we have. And green is for anybody who's been flagged against someone else in the facility, like 2 inmates in on the same case, and they want to keep them separated.
Okay. So if you've got rivaling gang members, you might they're together, you might put them in green.
That's a possibility.
So we kind of got diverted a little bit, but part of your responsibilities sometimes is to have help people transport from one place to the other within the facility. But inmates are also free to, if directed, to make these appointments themselves if not flagged. In other words, you might say to an inmate, go ahead, you've been called up to the clinic, go ahead and walk up to the clinic.
Yeah, that happens all the time.
When that happens, in order to facilitate that, that's done by the pod deputy. They're the one that says, okay, go ahead and go.
Yeah, in that case, the clinic would call and said, I want inmate such and such, such and such, such and such. And it'd be the deputy to go ahead and verify that those inmates are allowed to walk on their own, and then send them on their way.
Okay, and those inmates, when they're traveling that way, they're monitored by the monitoring cameras?
Yeah, by Master Control, who has the cameras.
Getting back to the daily activity log, this one starts out, and actually if I back up a page, oops, went the wrong direction. Up a page. If I look at page 21 of the exhibit, it shows an entry that has a 3/10/2006, 6:56 first shift in pod, and then it has a time up here of 6:57 a.m. And am I correct in understanding that the 6:57 a.m. is when this thing became permanent? That is when it
Yeah,
was
because
stamped.
you could keep a running log and you would timestamp every individual entry, and then you would save those group of entries, and that 6:57 would be the time he saved that to the system.
Okay, so the way the system works is that at 6:56, it was time-stamped, that first shift was in the pod, and by Deputy Williams.
Yeah,
And then that was saved at 6:57 a.m.
yeah. It looks like those whole group of ones were saved at the same
Once saved, can't be changed.
We can't change them now.
And what we looked at talks about first shift in the pod. If we go to the next page, we can see it was Mary Staton was the first shift who arrived in the pod earlier at 6:56, right?
Yeah.
Then you talked about the head count, and I think you explained that, but when the head count is done, all the inmates are actually racked and in their pods, right?
Yeah, they're either on their beds if they're in a dorm, or if they're in a pod that has a cell, they would be in their cell.
So we focus at pod 1, maximum security, they're in their cell.
Yeah, they'd be in their cell.
And focusing on the first shift, you have experience working first shift in the high security indirect pods, don't you?
Yeah.
Isn't it typical that at time of head count that most of the inmates are simply in their bunks laying down asleep?
Oh, asleep, yeah. Yeah, on first shift, a lot of the inmates will sleep until almost lunch.
They'll skip breakfast.
Oh, it's very common. But first shift doesn't serve breakfast.
That's actually done on third
That's
shift.
actually done on third shift.
That would have been done, the breakfast would have been done.
Deputy Williams would
by
have done that.
Williams, where chow was served
Yes.
sometime around 6.
Yeah.
So if the inmate came out on March 10, inmate Bruner, to eat something, ate, went back to the pod, or didn't eat, went back to the pod, that would have been before Deputy Staton arrived.
Oh, yeah.
Then there's kind of an inventory on these forms. What is the inventory that, like, for instance?
You have to account for all your equipment, your radio, your keys. You have chem lights in case we lose power and we get blacked out. You have hair clippers for the inmates to use, and nail clippers, cleaning solution.
So an inventory is done of that. Is an inventory also done of the non-prescription drugs?
Yes.
Down to the pill, right?
Yeah, down to the pill. Yeah, they're an individual.
Yeah, so I could look at this inventory by Mary Staton that she did, and it was time-stamped at, well, it was time-stamped whenever it was time-stamped, but it was saved at 8:16 a.m., and compare that to the next deputy's entry and see how many pills were used.
Yeah.
What is DD?
Disability detention. Disciplinary detention.
And they require some additional observation by pod deputies, is that right?
Yes, DD time is for inmates who are caught major rule infractions, either fighting in a pod with other inmates, and then they would get a DD time, say 5 days, and they'd be sent there, and they'd be in their rooms 23 hours a day during that time.
Then we've got pod workers. What are they?
The inmates in those sections who requested to clean those sections, help keep those sections clean. For being a pod worker, they get an extra hour visit a week.
So these are the two pod workers that were
And they
there
could
for
change.
cleaning.
They could change from day to day if someone gets let out or goes on to prison or anything like that, someone else will just step up and volunteer to work that position.
Okay, but on this particular shift, it would have been Fish and Ogun Bayi. I'm not sure that's how it's pronounced. All right. And escorts, what does that mean?
I'm not quite sure what the restrictions were on those inmates at that day.
That just means that they have to go, if they go somewhere, someone has to be with them.
Yeah, we have quite a few inmates like that.
All right, now, looking at the same, but with some highlighting on it, I want to focus on these entries down here where it says 3/10/2008, 721, 3/10/2008, 752.
Okay.
Those entries would have been time-stamped at that point, right?
Yeah.
And would have been entered then at that time,
Yeah.
and then would have been saved not to be changed by any deputy at 8:16 a.m., right?
Yeah.
And they show deputies in pod with linen as of 7/21. Does that mean that at this point you and Mr. Jameson are out here somewhere in the gym?
Yeah, that's what we'd be. She has a one camera in the booth that just looks down the corridor coming in, and could switch over to inside the gym, and she would see us come into the pod.
And then it says deputies out of pod at 7:52 and announce showers and supplies. So that would indicate that everything's done by, at least at that pod, by 7:52.
Yes.
I know you didn't remember the exact time, but you thought maybe it was around 8 o'clock.
Yeah,
This would give the exact time.
Yeah, that would give the exact time. As a rover, I don't keep an active log.
You don't have a computer with you.
Yeah, I don't have a computer, so.
Now, let's talk briefly about linen exchange and the procedure. You've got, in this pod, there are 2 floors. There's, well, we're showing the bottom floor, and then there's an upper
Yeah,
floor.
there's a mezzanine level.
See that? That right here is points to the E.
Yeah, we have a mezzanine level.
And then the pod is really divided into 3 different sections, is it not?
That particular pod is, which is different from other aggravated pods.
Okay, so, and there's no communication or communicability between the inmates from these different sections, right?
No, they're not supposed to communicate between the
There's
sections.
there's a wall that
There's a
keeps
wall.
them from going.
Yes.
So we've got the section down here on Exhibit 15 or 415. The bottom, is that section B or A?
The one with the S107A door, I believe that's section A.
Okay, and then B, and B's where the DD people are.
No, A would be.
Oh, A's DD.
Would be DD. B would be. That actually is our just another section. We call it. Excuse me.
I don't know what it's called. Is that where you put the people that need to be separated for their own protection,
Yeah,
like the
that's-
sex offenders or things like that?
Yeah, sex offenders and whatnot. And then section C, which is very different from any other aggravated pod, is a very large section.
Okay.
All the other ones that'd be split in half.
Okay, so this is a large section for an indirect pod.
Yes, that's very large for an indirect pod.
So what the deputy will do, or a deputy will do, is pretty much left up to their preference in terms of how they send people out to linen exchange. But what they could do is they could pop open some or all the doors up on the top floor, let those folks go out, bring them back in, lock them up, pop open the bottom, bring them out, or some.
Yeah, some by whole sections. Sometimes we'd send a whole section out and do the whole section at once. Section C, sometimes we do it that way. Sometimes we just do, like you say, we'll just do the mezzanine on section C, and then after that's done, we'll just do the ground floor.
And from the pod deputy's standpoint, then the linen exchange is a pretty busy time, right?
Yes, it's a very busy time.
because they're letting people out, they're observing them, they're making sure they get back in.
In and out, in and out. It's pretty busy.
And during that linen exchange is when you and actually when Jameson got a call from Mary Staton saying, I've got an inmate out and I need your assistance.
Yeah.
And you authored a report on that. I think the report is in evidence as part of Plaintiff's Exhibit 2. And what you indicated is, I responded to Section C, where Deputy Staton pointed out inmate Bruner.
Yeah.
Now, where was she when you pointed him out?
In the booth. She'd be, from where that shot is, she'd be looking at that shot. Because that shot was probably taken inside the booth.
I don't want to belabor it, but I think it's important that we get the logistics here, so let me get a picture. This is part of Exhibit 414. It's a photograph in the booth where she would have been looking out. Is that right?
Yeah. That shot actually looks into Section C.
Yeah, and it would be looking and seeing what's mostly shown on Plaintiff's Exhibit.
Yeah.
Now, in order for her to get your point out, Mr. Bruner, when she's in the booth, how did she do that?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Well, it's just Staton pointed out Bruner is what your statement say. So I responded where Staton pointed out inmate Bruner. She's in the pod booth. How does she? Do you remember how she pointed him out?
I can't exactly remember how. There's glass all the way around. I don't remember. We have these little. We call them pass-throughs. It's where we could hand stuff to inmates through it and then slide it to them. It's for safety reasons in a maximum security pod. So I don't remember if we went up to the pass-through and we talked through that, or she just pointed to that inmate in there and said, you know, he needs to go back to his room.
And so she communicated in some fashion, whether through the pod or pointing, and then you made some observations. So I'll talk to you about those in just a second, but hold on. This is a maximum security cell. You deputies, when you're in jail, you don't have any weapons. You don't have guns or mace or clubs or anything like that, do you? And people that are in this facility, this part of the facility, some of them, I'm not saying Terry Bruner was one of them, in fact he wasn't, but some of them are potentially physically dangerous.
Oh, very violent, yes.
Very violent. And so the setup is to be able to observe them from a remote place and house them where you have a deputy who is in charge of them but is not physically at risk from the inmate.
Yeah, there's no direct contact, unlike other type of pods.
And as a result, that protects the deputy, but it also limits the deputy's ability to some degree to see precisely what's going on in the pod, isn't it?
It limits a lot.
Yeah. You can't. For the most part, you can't see the pod, an inmate laying down on it.
No, it's impossible. And you can't hear.
And you can't.
Yeah, the glass in those booths are, I don't know, it's an inch and a half thick. So you're really limited on what you could hear. You could hear screaming, but other than that, inmates talking, the TV on, the TV on in that section, you don't hear any of that.
Now, nothing that, getting specifically to your role here, nothing that you were told by Deputy Staton during the time period that you had your 30 seconds of contact with Mr. Bruner suggested to you that she had knowledge at that time that Mr. Bruner had allegedly not been eating.
Oh, no.
Actually, the only communication that you heard, the only information that you had from Deputy Staton is what you overheard from Jameson, and that is that there was an inmate out that needed to be put back into.
Yes. And that's actually a very common occurrence at the jail. Many inmates don't go back to the rooms. We usually walk in, usually just our presence, because in an aggravated pod, the deputy is isolated in a booth, and a lot of inmates know, they can't physically come out there and put them back in the room. A lot of inmates refuse to listen. So it's very common just having the rovers step in saying, come on, it's time to go back to your room, that will work. And they'll usually just walk back in the room. That's why we didn't think much of it.
And you saw Mr. Bruner and made some observations of him, and you compared him to other inmates that you had seen acting in a similar way before.
Yeah.
And you concluded, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what were your conclusions?
He was confused, and I believed he was like taking antipsychotic meds like lithium. Because I've seen that look before, and that's the way he appeared.
Is there anything, was he sweating?
Oh, no.
Did his belly seem to be protruding like a mountain out of his jumpsuit?
No, in fact, if I remember right, he was relatively thin.
Was he appeared to be breathing or having problem, labored breath?
No labored breath.
And he responded, not maybe with the quickest of response, but he responded to go back into his cell. Did you look into the cell?
Yes.
What did you see?
This is normal linen was on there, and a few papers on the ground. In pod 1, that pod used to be booking years ago. So those rooms don't have desks in them. So a lot of people just they don't have a desk to put their papers, their letters, and their legal paperwork. So it's usually just on the floor. So I saw papers on the floor, but that's all the cells in pod 1 are like that because they don't have desks.
So to summarize and let us get out of here, I guess. Quicker. What you saw is an inmate whose behavior wasn't too much different than what you were used to seeing.
Yeah, not too
An
much.
inmate that didn't look too much different than what you're used to seeing.
Yeah.
An inmate who you thought needed mental health help,
Yeah.
but didn't.
These aren't quite, you said, I'm going to summarize what you've been talking about for the last hour. Is there questions?
This is cumulative.
All right, thank you, Your Honor. At the conclusion of the day, when you saw Mr. Bruner for 30 seconds, did you have any hint or any belief or suspicion that he had a medical condition that was so serious that if he didn't get treatment, he might die?
Oh, no.
Did it even enter your mind?
No, it didn't. In fact, I didn't know he passed away.
All right, thank you.
Redirect.
Just one. I listened to you again. I listened to you for the last 45 minutes. You talked about your knowledge of a lot of things. A lot of things I didn't even understand. So you knew all this, but you couldn't figure out that a dying man was sick?
I didn't know he was sick.
Anything else?
No.
Anything else?
No.
Anything else?
Nothing more, Your Honor.
Okay. Can this witness be excused?
Yes.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, sir. You are excused. Members of the jury, I'm going to send you to lunch at this point and ask that you come back at 1:15. So please remember the instructions I've given you before about not discussing the case, keeping an open mind until you've heard all of the evidence and received the court's instructions with regard to the law. Obviously, we wouldn't be here if there weren't two sides to this case, and so there's a lot more testimony to come. Counsel, I need to take up something with you, so